We all have a desire to be wise. We like to understand how things work, to be able to answer questions, to make decisions, and to share what we know. We seek and we search out wisdom and knowledge of the things of this world, and for some, their diligent efforts have shaped our world today. And so let's consider a few of some of the most important inventions ever created. What about the light bulb? Invented in 1879. It's often said that Thomas Edison's invention changed the world. What about the telephone in 1876? Certainly this instrument has revolutionized our ability to communicate. What about cars in 1885? Cars completely changed the way we travel, as well as the design of the cities that we live in. The microwave oven, 1947. Credit cards, 1920. The digital camera, 1975. What about future inventions? 3D print. They hope to 3D print prosthetic legs, prosthetic hearts, 3D print things out of metal. And so we see from the beginning of time up until now, humans have made a remarkable progress in science, medicine, and technology, and they will continue. But with that, a question arises. The question is, have any of those inventions had success in eliminating war, crime, and poverty? Well, the quick and obvious answer is no. What about some wise sayings or quotes that we hear all the time? What about this one? Nobody is perfect. But then they tell us, practice makes perfect. They say you are never too old to learn. But then they tell us you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They say a stitch in time saves 9. But then they tell us if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So we see whether it's with wise inventions that haven't been successful in eliminating war, crime, and poverty, which has killed millions of people. We see whether it's wise sayings or quotes, how they often just contradict each other. So again, a question arises. The question is, where can we find true wisdom? Does it even exist? Well, there's one invention I left out. Perhaps you know what it is. Its value is so high that it doesn't have a price. And as I look out, I see most of you already have one. And so let's open up our Bibles, this tool, this invention, and let's see if we can find the answer to our question. Now, where can we find true wisdom? Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 9. So Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 9. It says, "The wise have been put to shame. They have become terrified and will be caught. Look, they have rejected the word of Jehovah." And what wisdom do they have? So we see human wisdom fails because it rejects the source of true wisdom, Jehovah God. Now, where does Jehovah dispense his wisdom? In his word, the Bible. And so this wisdom in this book is something we can trust because it produces good results in the lives of those who choose to live by it. So with that said, this afternoon we're going to consider 5 areas or 5 ways in which godly wisdom can benefit you and I. So first, how godly wisdom can benefit young people. Residents of one European country were asked to choose from 3 alternatives: beauty, riches, and youth. Do you know what the top choice was? Youth. Ones from all age groups agree that during your youth, you are in a special time in life. And so as we see in the Forest Hill congregation, no doubt there are many young ones, including myself. So how can we make the most of our youth? What godly wisdom are we given? Ecclesiastes 12:1 notably says, "To remember then your grand Creator in the days of your youth." So young ones, how do we remember Jehovah? Well, remembering Jehovah involves more than just merely calling him to mind. It means taking action. What action can we take? Perhaps auxiliary or regular pioneering. Learning another language. Moving to where the need is great. The LDC, construction work. Bethel service is an option. Reaching out for responsibilities in your own congregation. Or maybe even just getting baptized. So we see there's so many things we can do, so many avenues that as a young person you can take. But maybe you're a little like myself. You're a little apprehensive. Sometimes you can be a little scared or nervous to kind of step outside the box and reach those goals. Or maybe you feel inadequate. You don't feel like you can be that person. Well, let's see how godly wisdom can benefit us. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 48, verse 17. Isaiah 48:17. I'm going to read from the Byington version. It's worded just a little bit different, but it's practically the same thing. Isaiah 48:17. It says, "And now the Lord Jehovah has sent me, and his Spirit says, Jehovah, your friend in need, the Holy One of Israel. I am your God, Jehovah, he who teaches you to make good, who sets you on the road you should go by." So we see, based on the verse, that we have a friend that is very smart and very powerful. And he just so happens to be our creator. And so if we feel inadequate, basically, from the verse, Jehovah is saying, look, I created everything. The sun that you see in the morning, I created that. The stars and the moon that you see at night, yeah, I created that too. The trees, the grass, the flowers, the animals, I created all of that. And when you look at yourself in the mirror and you see yourself, I created you. That was all me. So as your friend, I will teach you. If we feel apprehensive, scared, or nervous, again, Jehovah says, based on the verse, look, I'm going to put you on this path. I'm going to guide you. I'm going to watch you. I'm going to walk with you. I can even hold your hand. I'll do whatever you want me to do, and I will do it. So isn't that a beautiful verse? Don't we see the wisdom in that verse? If we feel apprehensive or scared or nervous or inadequate, do we see how godly wisdom can benefit us? And so, young ones, as we continue to pour ourselves out there, following his guidance, we're not only remembering our grand creator, but we're spared the results of going down a path the world promotes. Here's an illustration. Being in the truth as a young person is like flying a kite. All right, you feel like you can go higher and higher if it wasn't for that string holding you down. So what do? Well, you cut the string. What happens to the kite? The kite comes crashing down. The very thing you thought was holding the kite down from going higher was actually keeping it up. And that's like the truth. As soon as you cut it out of your life, thinking you're going to take off, that's when you come crashing down. So please, when pondering your future, keep Jehovah's Day close in mind. Don't become envious of those who are making the most of this world, but rather listen to those who love you. Listen to godly wisdom. Remember your grand creator, and Jehovah will bless you. Second, how godly wisdom can benefit married couples. Imperfection plus imperfection does not equal perfection, no matter how or which way you try to arrange it. So obviously in a marriage, there are two imperfect people, so there can never be a perfect marriage. 1 Corinthians 7:28 says that husbands and wives will have tribulation in the flesh. But respect doesn't require perfection. In his word, God dignifies both husbands and wives. He directs them to show genuine love and respect for each other. But what's also helpful in a marriage is communication. It's often said communication is a lifeline in a relationship. Now, most problems can be resolved with just healthy communication. So we're going to see how godly wisdom through communication can be beneficial in a marriage. Let's look at Job chapter 12, verse 11. Job chapter 12, verse 11. It says, "Does not the ear test out words as the tongue tastes food?" Let's read that again. Does not the ear test out words as the tongue tastes food? So we see here what's called the taste test. Basically, Jehovah's describing communication or conversation as a meal. Now, this meal is cooked by one person and eaten by the other. Now, the person cooking and the person eating, which one needs the taste test? Well, it's beneficial for both. Communication obviously goes two ways. So we're going to see what wisdom we find for the person hearing the wisdom we find for the person speaking, and then we'll see how we want to respond to hurtful words that may come up. So what wisdom do we find for the person hearing? Well, in your marriage, you may have a critical or bitter moment, right? And we get it. It happens. Again, imperfection and imperfection. Your mate has said something offensive, something that upsets you. What do? Well, before you decide to be offended, think about this. Let's say you've just eaten some sour candy, and then you followed it up with a sip of black coffee. Disgusting, right? It sounds terrible. Now, is there anything wrong with the coffee? No. It's just what was in your mouth beforehand that caused you not to taste properly. So what do? Well, you walk over to the sink, you wash your mouth, right? You cleanse your palate, and then you taste again. So similarly, if we hear something that may cause offense, what do we want to do? Godly wisdom tells us to slow down, still our emotions, cleanse our palate, and then listen again and see if you can get the true meaning or true intent of what was said. Now, it's not always easy, but it's a skill we must learn. How does godly wisdom help the person speaking or cooking? Well, when talking to our mate, what advice are we given? Let's look at Colossians chapter 4, verse 6. Colossians chapter 4, verse 6. It says, when speaking, let your words always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should answer each person. So we see here from the verse that our words should always be gracious, well seasoned. And Paul wasn't focused on specifically what we should say, but he said in the verse how you should answer each person. So what we say may be right, but it's important to note how we say things. We always want to be gentle, right? We always want to be kind, especially when talking to our mate. Now, how do we respond to hurtful words? Again, being in perfect communication is always going to be a challenge. Perhaps our mate has said something hurtful to us, and we think we need to respond with something just as hurtful, perhaps even more hurtful. Before we do so, think about this. Let's say we're cooking, and we throw in some hot chili peppers, right? We stir them around. But we remember our mate hates hot chili peppers, right? Absolutely hates them. Now, we're going to fix them a plate and just hand it to them anyway? No, right? That wouldn't be loving. Also, is it enough to just pick those peppers out and then still hand it to them? Well, no, because by that time, the heat from the peppers have just permeated throughout the whole meal. So what do we have to do? Throw it away and start all over. Similarly, before we respond with something hurtful, something we know our mate hates, sometimes we have to just start all over. Throw it away and start all over. And this time when we return, and make our meal or words gracious and seasoned with salt. And so we see how godly wisdom, by means of the taste test, Job 12:11, can be beneficial. Now, the basic skill we want to learn is if we're listening or eating, we need to cleanse our palate, taste again, and see if we can get the true meaning or true intent of what was said. And for the person cooking or speaking, also cleansing our palate and then speaking in a gentle and kind way. Also, sometimes we may just have to step away to start all over and then make our meal or words gracious and seasoned with salt. And those who apply godly wisdom in their marriage find genuine contentment, and they maintain a good conscience. And above all, they show their love and respect for Jehovah, the originator of marriage. Third, how godly wisdom can benefit us when facing economic problems. For this one, we're going to consider the example of Eduardo. Eduardo and his family were going through economic pressure. So to help his family, he left and went overseas to find employment. So he finds a reasonable job, he begins to make good money, but then he studies the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses. And he realizes that he needs to take care of his family more so spiritually than physically. So he returns home. As he returns home, the economic pressures resume. He says, I understood that I neglected my children when they needed my guidance and affection. I had not been there to read them Bible stories, to pray with them, to cuddle them, and to play with them. His oldest daughter says, I felt emotionally insecure not having our father at home with us. When he returned, we only knew him by face and voice. It didn't feel natural when he hugged me. So Eduardo was determined to do all he could to mend his relationship with his family and to build up their spiritual strength. He says, my goal was to inculcate the truth in my children, and by word and example, not just to say I love Jehovah, but to show it. Did Jehovah bless Eduardo's faith? His daughter says, seeing all his efforts to be a good father and to draw close to us again made a big difference. When we saw him reaching out in the congregation, we felt proud. The world was trying to pull us away from Jehovah, but we saw our parents focus on the truth, so we tried to do the same. Papa promised to never leave us again, and he didn't. If he had, I probably wouldn't be in Jehovah's organization today. So what wisdom did Eduardo find throughout all of this? What godly wisdom did he find? Let's look at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Perhaps it was this. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. It says, let your way of life be free of the love of money, while you are content with the present things. For he has said, I will never leave you, and I will never abandon you. So what is the key? What was the godly wisdom? It was to be content. And that's exactly what he and his family did. He and his wife established a budget based on what material things they really needed. He took his children out of private schools, found good public schools for them. He and his family prayed that they could find secular work that would not interfere with their spiritual routine. How did Jehovah answer their prayers? He says, the first 2 years, we barely got by. My funds were dwindling. My meager income didn't always cover expenses. And I was physically tired. But we could attend all the meetings and go out in service together. I now make less than 10% of what I made overseas, but we don't go hungry. The hand of Jehovah is not short. In fact, we decided to pioneer. So what is the lesson for us? What does godly wisdom do for us in this case? Well, we want to seek Jehovah's direction before we make decisions and commitments, not after making them. But we also want to pray for his Holy Spirit, pray for that godly wisdom, and follow Jehovah's guidance. And keep the kingdom and Jehovah's righteousness first in your life, fully confident that God will make the way out for you, that he will never leave you, and that he will never abandon you. Some have ignored the risk of living apart from their family, from their spouse, and they suffered the painful consequences, as we saw in Eduardo's case. And lastly, we always want to remember that our family's spiritual needs are our priority. Fourth, how does godly wisdom help us when distressed by serious health problems? We're going to consider the example of Mephibosheth. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9. I'll kind of give you a background of what has happened up until this point. So Mephibosheth was the son to Jonathan and the grandson to King Saul. At this time, he was 5 years old when reports got back that both Jonathan, his father, and King Saul, his grandfather, had died. Now, as the camp gets the news, 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4 says his nurse picked him up and they began to flee. Now, as she's running, it says Mephibosheth fell and became crippled, broke both of his legs. Now, years passed by, and then David says in 2 Samuel 9, verse 3, it says, the king, or David, continued, is there anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may extend God's loyal love? Ziba, who was a former servant in the house of King Saul, he replied to the king David. He says, there is still one son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet. Now, as David hears this, he sends someone to go get Mephibosheth and bring him to his house. Then notice verse 6. It says, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came into David, he at once fell face down and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth, to which he replied, here is your servant. David said to him, do not be afraid, for I will certainly show loyal love to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will return to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you will always dine at my table. Look at verse 13. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he always ate at the table of the king, and he was crippled in both feet. It's a wonderful story, right? A beautiful story. So what is the lesson for us? How does godly wisdom benefit us if we're distressed by serious health problems? We have 2 points we want to remember. First, Mephibosheth lost his father and grandfather at 5 years old. As he's running away, he falls, he breaks both of his legs, he's crippled, he can't do much. Years go by. Maybe he feels like no one notices him. He may have asked Jehovah, why did this have to happen to me? If we have serious health problems, we may feel the same way. And because I have these health problems, I can't do much, Jehovah. I feel like no one notices me. Why did this have to happen to me? What did Jehovah do in Mephibosheth's case, and what will he do in yours? Again, in verse 3, David said, whom may I extend God's loyal love? So Jehovah notices you, and he won't forget you. And he's looking to extend his loyal love to you. Second, did Mephibosheth decline David's invitation to come and join him and eat at the king's table? Of course not. He knew that by being there, he would be encouraged, and he could encourage the people at the table with him. He also knew that eating at the king's table would mean he would be receiving the very best food. So for us today, if we have those serious health problems and they're distressing us, we want to avoid isolating ourselves. We need the encouragement and the love of our brothers. In fact, we need you to encourage us. And by being at the king's table, Mephibosheth ate the very best food. So where do we today find the very best spiritual food? Here at the meetings. So if you're dealing with those serious health problems, please ask Jehovah to help you keep enduring. Keep figuring out or learning how godly wisdom can benefit you in your case. Fifth, how godly wisdom can benefit us when coping with stress or loneliness. Have you ever asked a small child, where's Jehovah? What do? They raise their little hand and they point to the sky. And it's adorable, right? What if you ask an adult the same question? Where's Jehovah? And they raise their hand and they point to the sky. Well, then it's not as adorable, is it? But the question, where is Jehovah, is the important thing. So let's look at Job chapter 29. And for this one, we're going to look at the story of Job. Job chapter 29, verse 5. Actually, we'll start in verse 4. Job 29:4, it says, Job says, when I was in my prime, when God's friendship was felt in my tent, and when the Almighty was still with me, when my children were all around me. Look at chapter 34, verse 5. It says, for Job has said, I am in the right, but God has denied me justice. So we kind of get the state that Job is in, right? He said, when my kids were all around me, when I was still in my prime, when Jehovah was right there with me. I'm in the right, but Jehovah has denied me justice. But Elihu, and even in some more chapters and some more verses, we kind of get the sense that Job is kind of complaining or whining. But Elihu, who is a trusted friend of Job and a trusted friend of Jehovah's, notice what he says to Job in chapter 35, verse 9. He says, people cry out when under great oppression. They cry for relief from the domination of the powerful, but no one says, where is Jehovah? Or where is God, my grand maker? So to get a visual, imagine Job in a house and him replacing all the windows with mirrors so he can only see himself. he's complaining, and everything is about him. He's saying, Jehovah, when I was in my prime, right? When my children were all around me, when Jehovah was still my friend, I'm in the right, but Jehovah has denied me justice. So he's looking in the mirror, everything is about him, and he can only see himself. And Elihu is saying, Job, what are you doing? You've replaced the windows with mirrors. What was he trying to get Job to do? Job, turn the mirrors back into windows. Look up at the sky, look at the clouds, and ask yourself, where is Jehovah? Look at chapter 35, verse 5. Elihu said, look up to the heaven and see. Observe the clouds, which are high above you. So as Job is listening to Elihu, he begins to realize what he's doing. Look at chapter 42, verse 3. Job 42:3, it says, you said, who is this who is obscuring my counsel without knowledge? Therefore I spoke, but without understanding about things too wonderful for me, which I do not know. Verse 5, my ears have heard about you, but now I do see you with my eyes. That is why I take back what I said, and I repent in dust and ashes. So Job says in verse 5, but now I do see you with my eyes. So he turns the mirrors back into windows. What is the lesson for us? How does godly wisdom benefit us if we're dealing with stress or loneliness? If we're dealing with the stress of this world, or if you're struggling with loneliness, you're single, you want to get married, right? But you haven't found anyone yet, don't replace your windows with mirrors. Don't focus on the stress of this world. Jehovah, the stress of this world is just too much. I can't deal with it. Please, end the world already. Or your loneliness. Jehovah, I haven't found a mate yet. No one seems to suit me. Jehovah, please find me a mate. Don't focus on the stress of this world. Don't worry about your loneliness. It's okay to think about those things, but don't focus on them. Don't look at the mirror. But instead, look outside the window. Supplicate to Jehovah for his peace. Listen to the brothers and sisters in the congregation who are trying to help you. Keep enduring and focus on the ministry. And as you do so, you will see Jehovah is right outside the window. So this afternoon, we saw how wise and loving our great creator Jehovah is, right? We saw how wise this tool, this invention can be. But maybe we've reached our breaking point. The light in the lantern has just shut off. We appreciate the information, but it just doesn't really do much for us. And maybe our candle has been blown out. We're a young person, and we just don't know what to do. We see other young ones reaching goals, but you feel a little apprehensive. You don't feel like you can be that person. Maybe you're a married couple, and there are moments where communication just isn't the best. You don't always see eye to eye. And maybe you're facing economic problems. You're struggling to take care of your family's financial needs. You've lost your job. Months have gone by. Still nothing. Or you're distressed by serious health problems. These health problems are weighing you down. Every day is a struggle. In fact, it's impacted your service time. Your meeting attendance has taken a dip. Maybe you are dealing with the stress or loneliness. You're single. You want to get married but haven't found a mate. And maybe the stress of this world is just weighing you down. Once again, let's see how godly wisdom can benefit us. Let's look at our last scripture here in James chapter 1, verse 5. James chapter 1. Verse 5. It says, so if any one of you, young person, married couple, health problems, stress, economic problems, if any one of you is lacking in wisdom, let him keep asking God. For he gives generously to all without reproaching, and it will be given him. But let's say you've asked Jehovah, but I don't see results. I'm asking for this wisdom, but where are the results? Verse 6, but let him keep asking in faith, not doubting at all. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven by the wind and blown about. So we see from these two verses, we need to pray for godly wisdom, apply it, and then trust God to help you deal with life's problems. Keep looking outside the window. In the beginning, we talked about some inventions, right? The light bulb, all that type of stuff. So, the inventor of some of the most important inventions, sadly, have all passed away. But Jehovah, the greatest inventor of the greatest invention, is still living, and he will show you how to use his invention forever.